Hey friends, it's Kari from the Alford Homestead, and today we have another permaculture style raised garden bed for you guys. This is a lasagna method of raised bed, which means that we're just going to be sandwiching our greens and our browns every couple of inches until we fill up our bed. So my husband did the hard part here. He already put the logs out for me. The very first layer that we actually did was to lay down 4 to 6 inches of mulch. This is because we have very poor drainage and this place will be like a swamp after a good storm. So we wanted to just get that initial raised bed up. I recommend this if you are having the same issue with drainage. That mulch will decompose over time. Now, if you don't need to worry about drainage, don't worry about that. Just put your cardboard layer down first on top of the ground. Make sure that you're not battling any of the weeds, tall weeds, or anything like that. Just cut them down if you need to. But lay down, if you don't have cardboard, lay down quite a few layers of newspaper. That is another option. And just make sure that everything is completely covered in that bed and that each layer that you do is thoroughly watered. So the next stage that we're going to do is we're going to add our greens. Now, being that it is in the middle of winter and not summer or early fall when grass clippings would be an option here, we have an entire compost heap of mainly eggshells. And this is actually going to work in our favor for drainage as well because that will help to provide some bulkiness to the materials. But this also has some kitchen scraps and things like that in there. So your green layer is going to mainly consist of grass clippings or fresh kitchen scraps and things like that. You can also use manure. So we are going to use both actually. So the eggshells will add calcium, and if you use enough eggshells, it will support the drainage and increase the calcium for your plants. Certain plants really love this, some plants do not. Like your blueberries are not going to like this, right? Because it's going to increase the pH just a little bit. However, plants like tomatoes and peppers do love this. So keep that in mind when making this bed if you are using things like eggshell or lime, for instance, to raise your pH a little bit. So we're going to put about 2 inches down for each layer. Now, if you have more or less of one, then put more brown. The brown layer, which will come after the green layer, is going to be things like your straw or your dried leaves, things that are already mainly decomposed for the most part. So now we've got about a 2-inch layer of this eggshell green layer. And this is also going to help assist the next layer that we're going to do, which is still a green layer. It's going to be manure, horse manure, which any type of manure that you use is going to be a little bit dense. And so my thinking was we can still use the manure, but we're going to sandwich the manure between two of the thinner layers that are going to help aerate this manure over time. So now that we have those 2 inches of eggshell layers down, we're going to add another inch or two of the horse manure across the entire surface. Now again, like I said, manure, straight manure is pretty heavy. Use whatever manure that you have. Just be aware that it is a pretty dense source of your green material. So that's why we are adding the eggshells as well. Now these beds work really well if you get them done in the late summer or early fall so that it can sit for a full 6 months. Being that we only have a couple months until planting, I'll show you how we modify this bed a little bit so that we can start planting pretty much immediately. Okay, so now that we have our layer of eggshell compost and our layer of manure, we're going to lighten this up with our brown material, and that for us is going to be dried leaves. We are still in that season where we have plenty to go around. I love collecting dried leaves. They decompose so nicely. They're so fine already. You want to make sure you get plenty, like more than enough, because this will sort of shrink down. So the more, the better. And just make sure again that you are watering everything down as you go. It kind of helps to have someone just watering the whole time while the other person is doing these layers. Now we're going to repeat. So now we're going to put the rest of the eggshell compost down, and then followed by another layer of the horse manure, followed by another layer of the leaves. And again, if you have more of one item, whether it's if it's green or if it's brown, try and make sure that you have more of the brown layer than the green layer. And again, this will actually work in your favor because depending on how big your bed is, you might not have that much green material like kitchen scraps to fill up an entire bed, or grass clippings to fill up an entire bed. So that's why we're using the manure mainly. And again, we're just supplementing this manure with things that we know will help to increase the efficiency of this bed, the drainage of this bed. And you can also add any of your other supplements at this time. Okay, so we have our final layer for our sandwich here with the leaves. Now you could leave it at this if you have enough time on your hands. I would say about 6 months to cover this either with a tarp or just leave it with extra leaves so that it stays moist. But being that we're going to plant in the next couple of months, we are going to top this off with some compost. You can also just use topsoil again if you're not rushed for time. This compost here is not fully finished. I would say it's about halfway there. However, I'm not too concerned about that because there are so many healthy worms that we saw in this compost, and they're going to do a lot of work while they're in this bed. So we're going to put a good 3 inches of compost down. That way we can plant in this bed in just a matter of 2 months. So I'm not too concerned that the compost still needs to sit. It will work its magic in those 2 months, especially if you keep the bed moist. That way the worms can do their job. If you have a dried out bed, things aren't going to decompose very quickly. The worms aren't going to be efficient as they could. So make sure that if you don't have any rainfall to assist in this, that you're taking the hose to it and giving it a good soaking once a week and covering it up in the interim so that it locks in that moisture. So you can do that with a heavy duty tarp. You can do that with a layer of leaves if you don't like to use plastic in the garden. That is also an option. So we've got our 3-inch layer of compost down, and now again, this is where you can just use what you have on hand. We're just throwing another layer of leaves down to help protect those worms and that composting system to help it be efficient and retain moisture. You can use a tarp if that's what you have. And this is an example of how swampy it is. That is more or less an unmulched area of the garden, and to the left is the mulched area of the garden. So you can see kind of what we're working with here. So this is the finished product. It's almost like a cross between the lasagna method and the hugelkultur bed, which starts as like a layer of wood and you build up from there. This is going to really help support drainage. It's going to be full of nutrients this summer, and it will just get better as it sits over time. Okay, you all, I hope you enjoyed that. Leave down in the comments below what you thought of that. I will see you guys next time.